My name is Chuck Harter, and this is my real story. My mother had 5 kids. Every time the church door was open, we were in church. It's only 2 blocks away from our house. Every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, every VBS, Bible school, every revival, we were there. So I grew up in the church. My father was a disabled veteran from World War II, and there was a mortar shell hit him and took off both legs just below the knees and took one eye out. So because he was a disabled veteran, he found a job of being a limousine driver for a rich guy in Auburn. But for some reason, he and my mother separated, and I don't even remember my father other than going over to my grandfather's house, which is only 2 houses away from mine, once a month to see my father. Wasn't much of a meeting because he and my grandfather was watching wrestling, professional wrestling on TV all the time. And we just sat in the same room, and then he would leave and would go back home. And that's the way my early life was with my father. When I was 10 years old, I walked forward at a revival, dedicated my life to Jesus, and because it was the Church of Christ, I had to get baptized immediately to be saved. That's what they believed. So they had a baptismal tank, put a robe on me and dunked me in the water and brought back up. And right after that happened, my first memory, somehow I snuck out of the church, climbed into my back seat of my grandfather's car. And they gave me a New Testament with Psalms. And I was holding that, and I was just talking to God. I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this, and I'm going to study this. And He's held me to that my entire life. I've always had the desire for the Word. I've always enjoyed studying it. My mother never got much money to raise all 5 kids from my father, so she had to go back to work, and she worked in a factory. And she did that for 30 years until she retired. I, as the oldest boy, have 3 younger brothers, and my sister, as the only girl, we had to raise the younger kids. We were trained to take care of the house, learned how to cook, learned how to do laundry. That's what my childhood was like. We grew up in a little town called Newville. If they're lucky, they had 100 people in the whole town. And I remember the very first time that my teacher, my Sunday school teacher, asked someone from the class to teach. And I was like a 7th grader. And I said, sure. And it was a country church with no air conditioning. And I was just preaching along. The teacher interrupted me and said, Chuck, you better sit down. Am I doing that bad that I have to sit down? He said, no, you're so white, I think you're going to pass out. The sweat just shut off, and I just went into shock. And I sat down, and as soon as that happened, I was just totally drenched. And that was the start. Now, that never stopped me. I started Tri-State College, and I went there for 3 quarters, ran out of money, went to work in a factory to get some money. My friends and neighbors drafted me into the Army. It was the Vietnam War. God protected me. So I was in Korea for 13 months, started college again. This time I changed. So I went to IPFW. My ultimate desire was to become a TV repairman. That was the most I could think of because no one in my family has ever been in college. I was the first one. After 2 years, my eyes got opened up and I said, well, I want more than this. So I went 2 more years. I worked 3 days a week, went to school 2 days a week. 2 more years, I got a degree in electrical engineering, hired by GTE. When I met Lucy, through her sister, she set me up with a blind date, Debbie. On the phone first, she was talking to Debbie, and I said, hey, let me have the phone. So I talked to her and I said, hey, how about going out on a date? Let's go to a movie. She said, I don't go to movies. And later she told me, well, that took care of that guy. I said, okay, I've got some friends that like to play cards. How about going over to their house tonight to play cards? And she said, I don't play cards. Because in the Church of God at that time, they didn't go to movies and play cards. To me, that was just a challenge. I thought, oh, this is someone that really walks their talk. So I said, okay, do you like ice cream? Well, yes. So I said, let's go to At's Ice Cream and have ice cream tonight. She said, well, I did have plans to wash my hair tonight. And I thought, well, what's so big about that? That'd take you 5 minutes. So she said, well, okay, come on over. So I got over there and I had to wait 30 minutes for her to dry her hair. I didn't know it took girls an hour to do their hair, so I had to learn. So we went to ice cream. Our first 2 dates was walking down to At's Ice Cream shop. And our third date was to ride her tandem bike, which we have setting out in front of our house right now. Got around to Christmas time after about 6 months. And on Christmas Eve, right after midnight into Christmas Day, I dropped to my knees and I proposed to Lucy to marry me. Luckily, she accepted. So I would go to her church. She wanted to go to Church of God one Sunday, and she would go to my church, Church of Christ, because I wanted to go to my church. That's all I knew. One day after church on Sunday night, the elders and the pastor asked me to meet with them in a room in private. We understand you're going to another church. I said, yes, I am. And they said, you know, if you go to any church but the Church of Christ, you're going to hell. And I said, what are you talking about? I've been in this church my entire life. You've never taught that way. From the pulpit, it has to be the Church of Christ. So I went home last night pretty well in shock, because this was my church family. Called Lucy and I said, you won't believe it, but they said if I go to your church anymore, I'm going to hell. She said, well, what do you think about this? She said, should we break it off? She was ready to break off the engagement. She said, I can't go to that church. I got to go to Church of God. I said, no, I think we've been praying about which church to go to, and I think God just answered it. We're going to your church. And I went back to the Church of Christ one time, and they treated just me like a heathen, a non-believer. And a lot of those members were my own family. That was sort of a strange thing that happened. I got a call that GTE bought up Contel, and they moved me from Seymour right back to Fort Wayne. So God is just, He just watched over me. When I went to work back to GTE, they gave me a job that was 2 levels lower than what I had before. But with the favor of God, they never reduced my pay. For the next 11 years, I was paid at a manager level, even though I was at a supervisor level. So that's how God takes care of me. Paul Drager was the pastor of the Big Lake Church of God, and he was my brother-in-law. And Debbie, Lucy's sister, went there, and they talked us into moving here to Columbia City just so we could attend their church. So this is just the way that God has always watched over me. I felt weak. I went to the doctor. They said, well, maybe it's your cholesterol medicine. So they changed the medicine. A year later, I went back to the doctor for the annual checkup. How you doing? I said, I'm still feeling weak, a little weaker. They said, maybe it's the medicine. Let's change again. So for the 3rd time, they changed the medicine. I was still weak. So I got to the point that I had to walk around with crutches and electric scooter, and that lasted for a while. Then I couldn't get into the scooter anymore, so I had to walk with a cane. Then I kept getting weaker. Then I had to walk with crutches. Then they took a muscle biopsy, sent it to Mayo Clinic, and found out I had an autoimmune disease called inclusion body myositis, a rare disease. The doctor didn't even know what it was. He had to look it up. For 17 years now, I've been getting weaker and weaker. Now I'm to the point that I'm in this lift chair. I stay here 24/7, sleep in the chair. The disease that I have reduces my muscles. So when it started reducing the muscles in my esophagus, I no longer could swallow. I did a swallow test, and it's just gravity. When I eat, it gets into my lungs and it makes me cough. And they said you can't eat anymore. So they gave me a feeding tube, and that's what I have here. 5 times a day I eat 8 ounces of protein drink. 8 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 8 o'clock at night. That's what I eat. That's my full meal. I haven't had anything to eat. Well, it will be 3 years in March. The only thing I've had in my throat, in my mouth to swallow, is communion. I figured God can protect me. So I take communion, and that's all I take in my mouth. I can't even swallow my saliva. I have to spit it out. So the quality of life is decreased. I believe in healing. He never turned anybody down that came to him for healing. The Bible says, by his stripes we were healed. So I believe my spirit has been healed. I'm waiting on the manifestation from the Spirit into my body. If he takes me home, like Paul says, it's better to go to heaven, but things not too bad. I watch 3 or 4 preaching service every morning. I read what you guys write, the Bible, I read the Bible. I've got different things over here that I read and I study. So God he takes care of me. Family watches me and takes care of me. He's with me. He's faithful.